you are reading in a second language? Well, the key challenge, I believe, is about academic reading. Academic reading is one of the most important aspects of a master's programme. Here's an outline of what I'm going to cover. First, I'll talk about why reading is such an important skill at postgraduate level in the UK. Then I'll touch on the most frequent challenges that students often encounter based on what previous students have told us. I'll go on to explore some skills and strategies that can help you to face these challenges. And finally, I'll summarise the key points and remind you how you can benefit from this pre-sessional course to gain proficiency and confidence in reading. So, why is reading so important for postgraduate studies? Well, more is expected of postgraduate students. You're expected to read more widely. Reading lists are longer at postgraduate level. You're expected to read more independently, to go beyond the reading list and to find your own sources. And, this one is very important, you're expected to read more critically, by which I mean you're really expected to question and evaluate what you read. I'll say more on this later. Reading is a crucial aspect of your assessments. The University of Edinburgh uses various forms of assessment, but the most typical involves producing a piece of written work partly or wholly based on what you have read. That's why the final assessment on this pre-sessional course is this kind of reading into writing assignment. For this kind of assignment, you'll need to use your reading to present and support your argument. And you'll need to demonstrate that you've not just understood what you've read, but also that you have critically reflected on it. We sometimes make a distinction between knowledge telling and knowledge transforming. The former, knowledge telling, means reporting, repeating the information you have gained from reading. The latter, knowledge transforming, means taking the information and ideas that you've read and making them your own, doing something creative and original with them, using them to construct your own argument. Okay, so those are some of the main reasons why reading is so important for you as a postgraduate student. However, it can present many challenges. What are the main challenges? We've asked our students over the years, and these are the points they have raised. Some challenges relate specifically to the fact that they are reading in a second or third or fourth language, while others are related to the act of reading itself. So, regarding language, what's the effect of the fact that you are reading in a second language? Well, the key challenge, I believe, is the amount of unfamiliar vocabulary. Research seems to show that in order to fully understand a text, you have to understand 95 to 98% of the vocabulary in the text. In other words, the vast majority of words. Another issue is that some academic texts, not all, contain quite complex sentence structure, which can also be an obstacle for a second language reader. The other main challenges are related to the act of reading itself. One that is mentioned over and over is the sheer amount of reading that students have to undertake. I once met a student who I had taught during the summer, and I asked how she was finding her master's programme. She sighed and replied that she felt like she was doing a master's in reading. This requirement to read so widely may be unfamiliar. Some students have told us that they didn't have to read much at all for their undergraduate degree, perhaps just a set textbook. Another big challenge, we've been told, is finding sources to read. You'll normally be given lists of recommended books and articles, but you are expected to read more, especially if you want to achieve more than a minimum passing grade, and of course also to develop your own interest in your subject. Another challenge that's mentioned by many is their slow reading speed. That's related to the amount of reading, of course, as you can't read slowly and read a huge amount. Now, an average L1 speaker of English has a reading speed of around 300 words per minute, whereas some international students have a reading speed of only 60 words per minute. This is often due to what's known as subvocalizing, which basically means saying the words in your head silently as you read. This inevitably slows down the speed at which you can read. Here are some other challenges we've been told about. One is a lack of familiarity with the kind of text types or genres that you'll come across. For example, many students say that though they are familiar with textbooks, they've not read journal articles before, so they don't know what to expect. Some students say they can have difficulty identifying the main points being made in a text and distinguishing them from subsidiary points. Another point that has been raised was the need to have a clear idea why you're reading the text, to have a clearly defined purpose in your mind before you start reading, in order to read the text efficiently. As I've mentioned, a very important aspect of reading is reading critically. Many, in fact most students tell us that they find this very difficult. I know I keep mentioning this, but it's for good reasons. The last major challenge I'll mention here is taking notes while reading, in order to have a useful record of what you've read that you can refer to and use later. So we've talked about the challenges, but how do you deal with them? For the remainder of the lecture, I'm going to talk about some skills and strategies that you can use. I'll take the language-related issues first. I'd very strongly advise that you take every opportunity to expand your vocabulary. Remember, you need to recognise 95 to 98% of the words you meet in a text. I won't spend longer on this, as vocabulary is dealt with elsewhere. So, I'll move on to complexity. When you come across a very complex sentence and you're finding it difficult to understand, what you need to do is to try to unpack it. Try to analyse it into its component parts or elements, then see how they fit together, how they relate to each other, in order to convey the writer's meaning. Using coloured highlighting may help with this. For example, you can use coloured highlighting to identify the subject and main verb in a sentence. It's not always obvious at first reading, especially if the subject is a very long noun phrase, so highlighting can help you to decode the message. You can also use highlighting to identify the discourse markers. These are the words and phrases that show the reader how the ideas in the text are connected, or how different sections of the text are connected, how the text is organised. Discourse markers can also indicate the author's attitude to the ideas expressed. You can also use highlighting to identify reference. For example, if there's a pronoun like it, or she, or this, it will usually refer back to a person or thing or concept mentioned earlier, and you can use highlighting to show the connection. Finally, you can use highlighting to link terms to their definitions. When a pronoun like it, or she, or this indicate the author's attitude to the ideas expressed. You can also use highlighting to identify reference. For example, if there's a pronoun like it, or she, or this, it will usually refer back to a person or thing or concept mentioned earlier, and you can use highlighting to show the connection. Finally, you can use highlighting to link terms to their definitions. When a writer introduces a new term, she or he will almost certainly provide a definition. So you need to learn to recognise the ways writers indicate they are giving a definition. They may use phrases like, "by this we mean," or they may simply use punctuation, brackets for example. Now we'll move on to issues related to the act of reading itself. We'll start with finding sources. You need to search systematically for relevant texts. If you know what you're looking for, because they're on your reading list, you can use the library catalogue. If you want to search for additional sources on a specific topic, which you should be doing, but you don't have specific titles, you can use a search engine like Google Scholar or Scopus to search for the topic. Okay, so we've said that slow reading speed is an issue for many students. The first step in faster reading is to stop subvocalizing, if you do. Don't read word for word, you don't have time. If you find you are following a text with your finger, if your finger is running along the lines of text as you are reading, then you're not reading efficiently. You need to try to read more globally, in chunks, in ideas, rather than individual words. That is, except when there's a specific part of the text you need to look at in great detail. Sometimes we talk about top-down and bottom-up approaches to reading. A top-down approach means looking at a whole text in a global way from above, like a bird flying over it, then zooming down slowly towards the text. A bottom-up approach means starting at the level of individual words, then working upwards, so more like a worm than a bird. This doesn't mean that you should always only take a top-down approach. There are occasions when you need to take a bottom-up approach, when you need to read in detail, but the top-down approach should always come first, if you want to read quickly and efficiently. You can start by reading the title and the main headings of an article. This may tell you that, in fact, the article is not relevant to your purposes, and you need read no more. If you decide it is relevant, you can then skim read the text very quickly to get an overall idea of the main ideas. You may also want to scan the text to look for a specific fact or piece of information that you need. When you are familiar with the typical structure of particular genres, you will not necessarily need to scan the whole text, as you may have an idea of where, within the text, you may find that information. This leads on to the next point. Okay, so students have said that at first they are very unfamiliar with types or genres of academic texts, for example, journal articles. However, you will soon begin to recognise different academic text genres. Use this knowledge to predict the overall structure of the sources that you read and to know where to find the information you want. For example, there are two main types of journal article. There are empirical studies, which report on research studies based on observation or experimentation, usually to answer a specific research question. These are very common in the sciences and in the social sciences. Then there are source-based articles. These don't report on a specific study. They don't aim to answer a particular research question. There are two main subtypes here. The first are often called state-of-the-art articles. These aim to bring together the most relevant research on a given topic. Then there are theoretical articles. Then there are source-based articles. These don't report on a specific study. They don't aim to answer a particular research question. There are two main subtypes here. The first are often called state-of-the-art articles. These aim to bring together the most relevant research on a given topic. Then there are theoretical articles, whose aim is to present a particular theory, or to discuss different theories which may be in competition with each other in a particular field. Just to give a typical example of a genre and the way it is usually organised, let's look at the structure of a typical article reporting on empirical research. First, you'll find the title, the name of the author or authors, their place of work, and an abstract, a short summary of the article. Then the main body of the article will typically have an introduction, a section explaining the methods that the researchers used, then a presentation of the results, followed by a section discussing and interpreting the results and coming to conclusions on the basis of the research. Finally, there may be acknowledgements and notes, and there'll almost certainly be references to other literature. And there may be appendices which could include difficult to distinguish the main points being made in an article from the subsidiary points, the details. This is very much linked to speed reading. In order to identify the main points, you should start by reading the abstract. Then, quickly read the introduction and conclusion. This should be sufficient to tell you what the main argument of the article is. Then, if you want to explore further, go through the rest of the body of the article, scanning for topic sentences. Usually a paragraph will have a sentence, the topic sentence, which makes clear the main point of the paragraph, and the rest of the paragraph will give further details, further explanation of the ideas expressed in the topic sentence. The topic sentence is usually the first sentence, but not always, so you need to be a bit careful. Don't always just assume that the first sentence will be the topic sentence. We mentioned earlier that it's important to have a clear idea of your purpose in reading a text before you start, in order to read efficiently. First, you need to decide what it is you want to learn from the text. Importantly, think about what you already know about the topic, or what you think you know. This will help you to understand the text. You may change your mind after reading the text. And what questions do you want the text to answer? It's a good idea to actually write down some questions that you want answers to. Then also think about what you want to use the information for. Do you want to get an overview of a new field? Do you want to find specific research findings to support your argument? Do you want to find an appropriate theory on which to base your own research? Obviously, there are other possible purposes, but these are probably some of the main ones. So, know why you are going to read. It's probably becoming clear now that you'll approach texts using different kinds of strategies depending on your purpose at each stage of reading. You'll use top-down global strategies for fast reading, prediction, search reading to answer specific questions, skimming for the main ideas and scanning for key words. And you'll use a bottom-up approach for much more detailed understanding. The coloured highlighting technique for unpacking complex sentences would be an example of a bottom-up approach. As I've already said several times, reading critically is crucial at postgraduate level. It is one of the most important assessment criteria. So, what do we mean by reading critically? Basically, that you should question and evaluate all the time as you read. This doesn't mean that you necessarily have to be negative. You can question and still end up with a positive evaluation. The point is to evaluate, not just accept without questioning. You should always be asking yourself questions as you read. Here are some questions you can ask yourself. What are the author's assumptions? Do you accept them? The author's assumptions are the ideas the author accepts, as if they are given, as if she knows everyone agrees with them. So, for example, if you read in an article something about international students' unwillingness to participate in seminars, what's the assumption there? It seems to be that international students are not willing to participate. Often an assumption appears as a noun. Students are unwilling to participate is a statement which could be expressing an opinion, but by changing it to students' unwillingness, the writer has turned it into a thing, into a fact. But you may not accept this. Students are unwilling to participate is a statement which could be expressing an opinion, but agrees with them. So, for example, if you read in an article something about international students' unwillingness to participate in seminars, What's the assumption there? It seems to be that international students are not willing to participate. Often an assumption appears as a noun. Students are unwilling to participate is a statement which could be expressing an opinion, but by changing it to students' unwillingness, the writer has turned it into a thing, into a fact. But you may not accept this fact. You might say, plenty of international students participate actively in classes. You might question the definition of participate. Maybe students who listen quietly and attentively are still participating willingly. So, this is just an example of how you can and should question underlying assumptions. For an empirical study, you can ask, were the researcher's methods appropriate to answer her or his research questions? Are her claims justified on the basis of her results? Students on pre-sessional courses worry a lot about being critical. They say, we don't know enough yet to be critical. But if you start practicing now, if you get into the habit of questioning and evaluating whatever you read, you will get better at it. The last skill I want to comment on here is note-taking. It's very important to have a useful record of your reading, because you won't have time to read everything again. Note-taking will be covered elsewhere, so I'll just point to some potentially helpful websites. The main point to bear in mind is that the notes you take should be as helpful as they can possibly be when you come to actually use the information and ideas that you extracted from the text. So, finally, remember, you'll need to read in different ways for different purposes. Top down always, bottom up where appropriate. You'll need to check you are sure you've understood the main points before going on to more detailed reading. Remember to ask questions of the text before reading, while reading, after reading. What do you want it to tell you? What will you use the information for? Remember to apply what you know already about the topic and about the organisation of texts to enhance your understanding and to increase your reading speed. And remember, it's very important to question and evaluate as you read. And also to expand your vocabulary and to unpack difficult sentence structure. And remember, this is very important. The kind of reading you did for IELTS is very different from the kind of reading you need to do on your master's programme. You won't be reading short texts and answering questions about them. You'll be reading in order to write, to discuss, to present, and most importantly, to develop and enrich your knowledge. Students we interviewed said you will get used to this approach to academic reading. They reckoned it took about 2 months. And remember, enjoy your reading. Don't just regard it as something stressful that you have to do. You will learn something from everything you read, even if it is that you totally disagree with the author. And here's some suggested further reading. There's also a video that you can watch. And finally, I'd just like to say that I wish you good luck with your reading on your master's programme.